Dobrý den, milé divačky a milí diváci, milovníci vědy a dokumentárního filmu. Já jsem Dominik Vontor, asistent Industry for Science a vítám vás na 56. ročníku Akademia Film Olomouc a na rozhovoru k soutěžnímu filmu Zakódovaný bias. U tohoto interview vítám režisérku snímku Shalini Kantayya. Shalini, your film is remarkable and I think that its distribution comes at a very good time because right now, vast majority of the people in the world are online with their technologies. So I'm just wondering, when did you come up with the idea to make a film about robotized racism and coded biases in technology?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to share the film Coded Bias with you and to speak with you today. I have a love for disruptive technologies and love to explore whether they make the film, whether they make life more fair or less fair, whether they give more opportunity or less opportunity, and for whom. And 3 years ago, I didn't really know what an algorithm even was. I think most of my background about artificial intelligence has come from the imagination of Steven Spielberg or science fiction filmmakers and writers. And I sort of stumbled down the rabbit hole when I read a book called Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neill, and subsequently Algorithms of Oppression by Sophia Moja-Noble, and Artificial Unintelligence, and so many more. And I don't think my background as a science fiction fanatic really prepared me to understand the way in which algorithms, machine learning, AI is increasingly becoming a gatekeeper of opportunity, deciding such important things as who gets hired, who gets healthcare, who gets undue police scrutiny. And simultaneously, as I was learning about the ways in which we are outsourcing our decision-making, our very autonomy as human beings to machines in ways that shape and change human destiny, I came across a TED Talk that Joy Buolamwini gave and began to understand that these same systems that we're trusting so implicitly have not been vetted for racial bias or for gender bias. They've not even been vetted to show that they won't do harm to people, that they won't discriminate. And in many cases, they haven't even been vetted for some shared standard of accuracy, aside from the company that stands to benefit economically from its deployment. And that's when I really began to see that everything that we love in democracies is being changed by artificial intelligence, is being transformed. Whether we're talking about access to information or journalism or fair housing or equal rights in employment, all of this is being transformed by AI. And what I began to be terrified of is quite what Joy Buolamwini articulates so clearly in the film, which is that we could essentially roll back 50 years of civil rights advances in the name of machines being neutral, these black box algorithms being neutral and fair when they're not. And that sort of set me on the journey to make the film.
So one of the topics of the film is these social injustices that are happening thanks to objective, but in reality, socially and racially biased algorithms in technologies. So can you tell us, where did you find those people whose lives were affected by the coded biases in technology?
It's a very good question, because I think oftentimes the data scientists are working in their own bubble. And one of the things that I sought to do with coded bias was not just translate the science in a way that makes sense to your grandmother and your child, your 12-year-old child, but also I sought to seek out the stories that give it the stakes, that show us how much is on the line when these systems fail. And what I realized is it's actually really hard to know even when you've been the victim of algorithmic bias. You don't know why your resume has been sorted out in the first round. You don't know why maybe you got a higher price for health insurance than your next door neighbor or your colleague. And that is what is so frightening about these systems is it's so hard to tell when there's even been an automated model, a machine in the decision making process. And then to sort of understand when it's gone wrong and how a person fights back. And for that, I really relied on research. Silke Carlo's work I was introduced to through a study that Big Brother Watch did. The story of Daniel Santos' school teacher was sort of a shoot of Kathy O'Neill's research. The Brooklyn residents I came to through Joy. And so I really relied on research that had been going on for years before, scholarship that had been going on for years before, to identify some of these case studies and the real people who had been harmed and had the courage to fight back.
There is really a lot of characters in your documentary, but there is one protagonist, let's say, and that's Joy Buolamwini. Can you tell us something more about the process of filmmaking with her, and maybe how has her journey towards the clear transparency of AI in the use of technology continuing?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of Joy, but I'll talk about a little bit about the making of the film. And I would say, I sort of cast a wide net and sort of there were a few people that I was exploring as characters, and it wasn't actually until I was sitting in Congress watching Joy testify that I knew I had a full story arc. And that was because you see sort of a graduate student who's trying to make an art project work. And then you see her testifying before the House Oversight Committee. And it was only then that I realized, there's a film there.
Yeah, exactly. The scene where Joy is having the hearing in front of the Congress is really fascinating to see because we are witnessing two different point of views from two political wings that are suddenly agreeing on something. So can you tell us what kind of importance has this moment have for the US legislation?
Well, it was an important moment, I think, in the film because uh, it's very rare that you see a right wing, sort of Trump supporting Republican agree with a left wing, left of center Democrat. And you saw that happen with Jim Jordan of Ohio and uh, Alexandra Ocasio Cortez of New York. And what was so amazing to me is to see someone who is on the far right, who's very conservative, who usually would be not speaking out against law enforcement use of surveillance, say, wait a minute, 117 million Americans are in a police database that you can warrant without that they can access without a warrant, that no one in an elected office is overseeing that process. And that's when you sort of begin to realize that this technology is going straight from big tech to law enforcement. With no one in between. And that was sort of the scary moment. And seeing both sides of both parties agree was amazing. Ultimately, no legislation has yet been passed, but we're still hopeful that the conversation has been moved forward.
Yeah, I'm also asking because you are showing the case of China in the documentary. And we see that China used this very totalitarian form of usage of AI and technologies to follow their inhabitants. So I'm asking, do you think this is just some kind of like an extreme form of political government, or is it something that both Europe and USA can easily slip into?
Oh, I think it's something we can easily slip into. Europe, a little less because you have the GDPR, and that gives you some framework of protecting um, data rights as civil rights, data rights as human rights. There's some framework there. But I think in China, when I show it to American audience, they sort of lose their mind. They're like, wait a minute, this person likes this facial recognition system and a social credit score. And she says she doesn't have to get to know anyone. She can just trust the score. But I think that there is a way of saying, oh, that's a galaxy far, far away from the United States. But I think it's really right here. And I don't know if I trust corporate surveillance any more than I trust state surveillance. Um, you have in the United States corporations and law enforcement essentially picking up the tools of authoritarian states with no democratic rules in place of how these technologies should be used um, by to protect citizens. And so I think it's and also I think the use of it in China is sort of a reflection of ourselves, because we all have a moment where we're like, wow, I could buy a candy bar with my face, this is amazing. Right? Like, how convenient is that, without really thinking about what we're giving away in that race to efficiency. And so I sort of try to show China not as a distant reality, but actually a reality that's much closer. That would be easy to slip into if we're not mindful and careful and without rules.
So there is this Chinese woman in your film, and she has relatively positive attitude towards the China's usage of the data and AI technologies. So can you tell us something more about her story, and when did you decide to include her in the final cut?
In China?
Mhm.
Yeah. I I felt like China is sort of like a Black Mirror episode inside of the documentary. It's kind of a vignette. And it was really important for me to show these different data approaches to data protection. You have Europe that has the GDPR and some framework. You have the US that has is a wild, wild west with no laws in place. And you have China, which shows sort of this unfettered access to when authoritarian regimes have access to your data, and the way that it's used to sort people and give access to opportunity based on that. And also, I think it gives us a way to think about how technology is reshaping our behavior and our relationships to one another. Kathy O'Neill calls it algorithmic obedience training. And so for me, it was very, very important to share the sort of way China is using facial recognition and the social credit score. But I think it's important to say that, of course, China doesn't have freedom of uh, speech. It doesn't have freedom of press. So it would have been dangerous for someone to speak to me who was speaking out against facial recognition. Um, so we were able to get who we got, who was this young skater. And I didn't get real time translation as it was being shot. And so it was months later that we were in the editing room with the Mandarin translation. And it was me, my editor, and the Mandarin translator, and we just lost our minds. We couldn't believe that she was saying this. And what was wonderful is that this was real. There was nothing heavy-handed about it. We weren't putting words in her mouth. Like, this is what she said. This is what she thought. It's no big deal. And I thought it was very important to include it as it was said, because it speaks to a part of all of us that is not thinking about what happens when we press a button and a car comes, and we're not thinking about all of the different ways in which our society is being remade by that technology. And so that was why it was important to put it in the film. And I'm very grateful to my team in China for helping us get that access. And the other thing I wanted to say that's really important in the way of China that is probably less talked about in the Q&A is how it's being used in Hong Kong. And I had never seen the ways in which protesters were actively rebelling against facial recognition as a tool in an authoritarian state. I had never seen an umbrella used like that to block a facial recognition camera. And the way that protesters were actively had this animosity towards the cameras because the facial recognition cameras themselves represented tools of the authoritarian state. And I thought that was very important to include.
Yeah, so this is obviously very scary, the AI technologies that are on the streets. But for me, more scarier are the technologies that we bring at home, you know, the mobile phones, tablets, notebooks. We are almost 24/7 online. And our home, that should be the place where we feel safe, is becoming the part of this shared universe. So do you think, are there any ways how to avoid these situations without going offline or doing it illegally?
Well, this is sort of the inconvenient truth is that it's very hard to opt out of these systems. This is the only way we can be together today. You have companies like Google that make up of 90% of information searches globally. 90% of your information is getting filtered through an advertising platform controlled by one company. You have it's very difficult to opt out. You know, you can put tape over the camera, and people, I feel like, are sometimes asking for this special sort of voodoo spell to put on their privacy settings to keep their information safe. And there are certainly things that you can do in terms of, you know, I don't take pictures of protesters and post them because I know that law enforcement can scan their faces, and I want to keep protesters exercising their civil rights safe. So there are things like that, but the truth is that we need government protections of big technology. I think the inconvenient truth of this is that this is a challenging issue, like climate change, like COVID-19,
Mhm.
that needs where individual responsibility is only part of the equation. And, that actually we need governments to work to do their part to solve these crises. And sometimes we think that things should come from public policy down to citizens. And what I've seen is quite the opposite, that it's actually people that need to be literate about this complex science, that need to understand the systems that we're interacting with, that need to empower ourselves with education around what are algorithms, what is machine learning, what is AI, how is it influencing our lives, why did I get that on my Google search, why did I get that ad. I feel like it's this critical literacy um, that will actually push policymakers and not the other way around. I actually think it's the people that need to push policymakers because we can't trust them to lead. I think the tricky thing about big tech is their money is everywhere. Big tech money is in colleges and universities that teach computer science. It's certainly in progressive political leaders. It's in conservative political leaders. I mean, big tech power and influence. I used to work on climate change issues and renewable energy and dealing with the fossil fuel industry. I have never seen consolidated power like I've seen the power of big tech. And um, And so it is really up to us, we the people, to sort of disrupt the power of big tech. And I would not underestimate the power of literacy, of basic AI literacy. I think when it comes to AI, all of the knowledge has been in the hands of the few. So all of the power has been in the hands of the few. And I think the more that we can empower ourselves, and one of the things that the film Coded Bias seeks to do is pull up a chair for all of us at the table and say, these technologies are deployed on all of us. When a 10-year-old starts using a phone, they should learn what an algorithm is. They should learn about data collection and where data goes. And I think it's that kind of literacy from the ground up that will actually be a force to change policy. Because from what I've seen, it's the municipalities that are technological hubs where they understand how these systems work that are at the forefront of policy change.
Well, on the other hand, how much is it in the best interest of those big technology companies to force the government to regulate the AI laws themselves? Wouldn't it make it the process more transparent and reliable to the public if those companies made the first step?
I think my mantra on this is sort of like, don't leave the tech bros alone. And I think we have sort of trusted them for too long to do the right thing. I mean, and they don't always do the right thing. Because there's the Upton Sinclair quote that says, it's very difficult to get someone to understand something when their paycheck depends on them not understanding it. And that's the case that we have with big tech. And we've seen it with the firing of Dr. Timnit Gebru at Google, who is one of Google's lead AI ethicists and a Black woman who was fired. And it's had a chilling effect throughout the community because it goes to show, can we really trust big tech to regulate themselves? You have companies like Amazon saying we don't need a union. We can do that on our own. We can set labor practices on our own. And I'm actually not a believer in people regulating themselves, or that they even are capable of doing so. Because when you think for a moment that 3 Black women graduate students discovered racial bias in technology that somehow IBM, Microsoft, and Amazon missed, that's significant. That goes to show that there's a failure in their systems, or there's a willful blindness to look the other way. And I've seen a pattern within these tech companies, including with the research of my film, Joy and Timnit and others, to discredit these researchers, to discredit research about ethics and bias in AI before the public gives a groundswell and says, no, you have to pay attention to this. So I think that, no, I don't trust big tech to regulate themselves. We need laws that they don't agree with sometimes, so that they can have some rules. I mean, I think they will tell us, oh, you're going to squash innovation. And I think that's baloney. I think that we have had a stunning lack of imagination about how these systems can work, because these systems have been designed and stewarded by a very small, homogeneous group of mostly white men from elite educational and economic backgrounds. And they have sold us a bag of tricks about the way these systems can work, and taught us that the only way this can work is what Shoshana Zuboff refers to as surveillance capitalism. And I think that's not true. I think it's a stunning lack of imagination. When you have an industry that has less than 14% AI researchers, you are missing half the genius from the room in the systems in the places where these systems are being designed. And so AI, the entire industry needs some standards so that we can have health and safety. And I believe in what Kathy O'Neill calls an FDA for algorithms. The idea that there should be some sort of body to vet the health and safety of these systems before they are deployed at scale. And we are living in a society of like the automobile going out before there were seatbelt laws and a car seat for your baby. Cigarettes with no label, pharmaceutical products with no dosage directions. That's the kind of lawless society that we are dealing with, unregulated entirely, when we're talking about artificial intelligence, and that cannot happen. And as long as they're regulating themselves, and we're seeing it already, democracies all over the world are in trouble. And you see, a company like Facebook. I consider Facebook to be a deeply anti-democratic institution, because on one sense, it's saying we are committed to fighting misinformation. With the other hand, it just banned every legitimate news source from its platform in Australia. Think about what this has impact this has when so many people are getting their news from Facebook. With the other hand, it's saying we'll not subject political ads to its truthfulness, to the same sort of vetting that it does other systems. And when it made those choices, it sided against democratic values, because we know that when misinformation is on the rise, so is authoritarianism. And so, no, these companies can no longer be charged with regulating themselves. Some of them are just, in the case of Facebook, I would call them grossly irresponsible when it comes to democratic values.
Well, I know that after the Sundance premiere of the film, you talked with some executives from those big tech companies, from Google, IBM, and they told you they love the film and it's something they are discussing internally, but your film might spark the discussion publicly. But have you ever heard back from those companies?
Well, I'm really grateful that every company except for Amazon, most big tech companies, I think Amazon, I probably talked too much smack about in the film for them to host a screening. But every other tech company has essentially hosted a screening of the film. They all have, ethics departments. They all have, many of them have platforms that deal with bias. The only company that I really think puts their money where their mouth is IBM. IBM disrupted their business model. They stopped selling facial recognition. They stopped researching it. They won't deploy it. My hat is off to them. I really think that's incredible. It's one thing, I think when you go to these technology companies, they often say, it was just bad data. We just are going to fix the data and create the perfect algorithm. And IBM was the first company to say, no, we're disrupting our entire business model. We're getting out of the game. We're not researching this technology. We're not deploying it. We're not selling it. We're done. And that takes tremendous courage and leadership on ethics to put your money where your mouth is. So not all companies are the same. And then I think, other companies, it's just different degrees of, where they stand on the issues. And I think that what I've seen is that you just can't trust them to follow up on their own. They need pressure from the outside. When Dr. Timnit Gebru was fired, 2,500 Google employees got behind her and did a virtual walkout. There have been resignations in the wake of that firing. And I hope that sends a message to Google and to the rest of the world that we can't trust Google to self-regulate. That having an ethics department within their company is not enough to shine a light on the kind of ethics that would sometimes disrupt their business model and cause them to lose money. And we need outside ethicists and researchers, because the other thing is, like, sometimes even in spite of the best efforts of the company, this stuff gets encoded. Even sometimes in the best, even when engineers are trying to control for bias, it still shows up in the technology. And not just bias, but harms, unintended consequences. And so we need people like Kathy O'Neill in the room vetting these systems to say, is it fair? Is it safe? Will it hurt someone? And it can't be left to the technology companies.
Well, yeah, those unintentional biases that are programmed in the programs, it's a huge problem. And I think that it also shows us a lot about how little we know about the biases within men. So, do you know if this film has already had some impact on the field of psychology, sociology, anthropology, or cognitive sciences?
Well, I can't speak for how it's impacting those industries, but I will say for myself, uh, I think the what I learned in the making of this film is a tremendous amount of compassion for human beings, because bias is not something that's in a few bad human beings. Like, it's not just in a few bad people have bias.
Mhm,
It's actually an innate human condition that we all have, and much of it is unconscious.
mhm,
And so I think that this sort of realization and acceptance that we all have bias and that much of it is unconscious, um, gives us compassion for ourselves. And also, it gives us more urgency to build inclusive teams that represent the world, because we need each other to shine a light into each other's biases, and that's really important. That sort of inclusion isn't just sort of good for the pictures. It's not good for just the community that's historically been left out, but it's actually integral to building systems um, that are fair and just and deployed on the world.
Well, we have already mentioned the teacher, Mr. Santos, who is in the film, and who was evaluated by the program to be a bad teacher, despite the fact that he was awarded the Best Teacher Award many times before. And the trial against the decision of the program was based on the 14th Amendment of Constitution of the US. And I'm asking, since data is being the part of everyday life of the Americans, do you think that maybe in the future the Constitution of the US might be supplemented by amendment that takes in account the transparency of data and the law?
I sincerely hope so.
Mhm.
Um, but right now, we have policymakers who don't understand what Facebook works. Uh, Mark Zuckerberg sits before our Congress, and you have a sitting senator asking him how Facebook makes its money, and Mark Zuckerberg has to explain, "We sell ads, Senator." Like, they don't understand how one of the largest companies in the world works. And so that doesn't give me a lot of hope. I feel that kind of education has to come from the ground up. But I will say, in the case of Daniel Santos and the importance of literacy, that I didn't understand until making this film, and sort of the brilliant cast of the film giving me an education, what was actual science and what was baloney, bogus pseudoscience. And that is the problem. Kathy O'Neill gave me I was on a panel with her, and she just said the most brilliant thing. She said, it's data science, so we should treat it like a science, not like a faith-based religion, right? And so in the case of Daniel Santos, if you stood 10 feet away from this man, you would know he was a good teacher. You could feel his commitment to his not even commitment, his devotion to his students, and how much pride he takes in being a good teacher, and not just a good teacher, but a good teacher to students that are often coming from backgrounds that are not privileged, and the pride that he has in that. And yet, an arbitrary algorithm comes along. This algorithm was created, and I kid you not, I didn't get to put it in the film, but it was created to judge fertility in bulls. I'm not joking. This is the same algorithm. And so the same algorithm that was designed to judge fertility in bulls sometimes gets implemented to judge if a teacher is a good teacher. And it's still this model, the value-added model, is still being used, and teachers all over the country, including in Florida, are fighting against this inhumane, unjust way of evaluating if a teacher is a good teacher. And then you even think about, can an AI system judge if a teacher is a good teacher? What does that even mean? Are we just saying we're judging teachers on the basis of whether your kid's score gets higher? Is that really what we are saying is a good teacher? And I think that happening to Daniel Santos is the perfect example of the blind faith we're putting in these systems, and that we don't understand the science and how to discern sound science from baloney. And that algorithm is baloney. And what Daniel Santos said, was basically like, this is a violation of due process. You can't fire me, you can't penalize me without telling me why. And this black box system is telling you why. Not telling you why. And I think Kathy O'Neill is exactly right. Why can't we apply that to all kinds of algorithms? I did not know that Uber drivers who require, I did not realize who are using the platform for their livelihood, right, to make a living. I didn't realize that if your Uber score falls below a certain rating, you get ousted from the platform. Well, that's the same as like an algorithmic boss, an algorithmic overlord who doesn't give you reasons why. You don't know if that person gave you a rating because there was surge pricing or there was traffic and it took the driver a long time to get there. And all of a sudden the driver gets this, this is like what we're talking about with China, an algorithmic, kind of scoring system. And all of a sudden that person is out of a livelihood. And so that is a perfect example of how we're not examining the ways in which we're giving power to algorithms that we don't understand and sometimes cannot be trusted with such decisions.
Well, do you think overall we need those systems and AI applications and technologies to judge people?
I think that it's on a very case by case basis. And to me, the bigger question is, who gets to decide? Who gets to decide that answer? Who gets to decide when AI is in the interest of the people? And yes, we should allow facial recognition as a tool to diagnose early onset of autism or some use in this limited way. Or perhaps we should have a case where there is a domestic terror attack and you go and get a warrant to use this technology from a judge in a certain usage and way. My thing is that none of that is in place right now. You have big tech running roughshod over democracies, doing whatever they want, saying the technology is safe when it's not been vetted by outside ethicists and policymakers and other stakeholders who don't have a financial stake in the technology. And there's no safety in place. So to me, look, I love technology. I made the film because I'm obsessed with technology. It's everything I think about. I love sci-fi. I love thinking about the future. I love thinking about the way technology is shaping the future. But there are no guardrails in place to protect us right now. And so to me, it's more of a question of what can we do to improve health and safety to make sure the technology that we are deploying is safe for everyone.
Shalini, my last question might be rather provoking, but I'm really interested in your opinion since you made this wonderful film and you showed us so many aspects of processing the data at the level of law and privacy. So the question to you is, do you think that the data privacy right should be universal human right?
Oh, that absolutely. What I've seen in the making of this film is that And you know, I always feel a little disconnected from the word privacy. I think the word for me is invasive surveillance and the ways in which our data, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that makes the East German Stasi look like they were cute and had a very light touch, what they can know about us right then. And to me, data rights intersects with every civil right, with every human right that we enjoy. And I think the bigger question is, you know, is the goal of human life to go as fast as possible, to be as efficient as possible? Is that really the goal of being humans and our human civilization? Or is it really to create a society that is based on respecting the inherent value and dignity of every human being? And if we believe it's the latter, then it calls for an entirely different way of designing technology. And so it's my belief that that data rights are human rights. And there's actually a declaration of data rights as human rights on the Coded Bias website that you can sign and become a part of, because it's my deep belief that this is really about the fight for the inherent value and dignity of every human being.
I'm very glad you are mentioning this, because there is infinitely many things that we can do when we witness the unjust AI behavior. There is very useful tools on your Coded Bias website. So can you tell us more about this?
Yes, you can go to codedbias.com/take action. And there's an amazing amount of tools to get literate about these issues, to have these conversations with your colleagues and at your dinner table. There's an activist toolkit. There's a discussion guide to host a party. And now the film is available in Netflix with subtitles all over the world. And it's my hope that you will host your own screening and share the film with your audience and follow up on reading and support some of the great organizations that are doing work in this field.
Great, Shalini. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share your film with us, with the Czech audience, and thank you very much for this interview. A děkuji i vám, divákům a posluchačům, že jste sledovali či poslouchali tento rozhovor, a srdečně vás zvu ke sledování filmu Zakódovaný bias a dalších filmů na naší online platformě watchandknow.cz. Pro AFO 56 Dominik Vontor.